every time in movies, who's getting robbed? Whose purse is getting robbed? Oh, it's a purse. It's a woman, right? Like women are the ones getting robbed. Women are the ones getting kidnapped and like held at gunpoint for the money and like whatever it is. It's usually women who in these movies, in this media and everything we see are the ones who end up getting harmed. We've already talked about the witch wound and about how women really were harmed for having money and have been. And so for some women, it's just like, it's not safe to have money because what if I get hurt in that process?
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy Podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, Jaye Anne, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. I'm Jaye Anne, your host, and I have Julie Dean Richards on with me. Say hello.
Hey.
All right, so today we are talking about feminine money wounds. This is an episode that I'm so looking forward to. It is going to change everything, instant classic. So let's dive in and get started. So, I don't even have a get to know you question.
Should we talk about our first experience with money, like having money, getting money?
I love this. I think I'll go first if you don't mind. I
Yeah,
never go first.
Please. Yes, first.
So I had my first job at 14 years old. I worked for a chiropractor, and it was the chiropractor I'd gone to for like years and years. And so my mom would drop me off at this chiropractor's office, and I would work all day. And all summer I worked 40 hours a week. It was fine. Like I was exhausted, whatever. And then I heard about this cool thing, like at the end of the year, you're supposed to get a tax refund. And I went to file my taxes. I put on my big girl pants. I went to the post office. I picked up a 1040 EZ, filled it out by myself. And at the end of it, I go, I'm getting $0 back? That's crazy. And I looked at my pay stubs and I was like, they took money, but they're not giving it back. I don't understand. And now I know I filed exempt, so I didn't pay any like federal taxes. I just paid like the Medicare stuff. And I was like, well, I want that back, like Social Security. And what the heck? So that was like my first foray into having like official money. And I was just like really confused about this whole tax thing, which made me like require myself to learn more about it. But I was like, I think I did it wrong, or like I got screwed over. I couldn't figure it out, but eventually I did. What was your first introduction to money?
Yeah, I kind of love that because everyone is confused about taxes to this day. Like taxes are a very confusing thing and something where a lot of pain stems for a lot of people around money. For me, my first experience with money was babysitting, right? Getting money. And we had this woman who asked us to babysit her kids. It was me and my sister, but I started going by myself and she paid us $10. Like so much money. Like that was like so much money for a 12-year-old kid to be getting for babysitting. Hey friends, it's Julie. I'm just popping in here real quick to tell you about a very special invitation we have for you. If you have been feeling deeply called to learn more about your feminine identity or to see what feminine power really is, or you're just loving the podcast, then Kaylee and I would love to invite you to join our community, Feminine Alchemist. Inside, we host live monthly women's circles, challenges, and Wheel of the Year celebrations. They are seriously so much fun. We have monthly workshops where we bring in experts to teach on anything from menstruation to mythology. You'll also get access to our library of courses about astrology, intuition techniques, sacred embodiment, and cyclical living. And most importantly, you'll be able to connect with women who are like-hearted and walking the same path as you. So if this sounds exciting to you, join today by clicking the link in the show notes or going to femininealchemist.com. That's alchemist spelled MYST. Okay, back to the episode.
So today we are talking about feminine money wounds, and there is a lot to unpack here. I don't know that we're going to get to it all in one episode. And even if we did, we'd probably have many more episodes about this because it's such a pervasive wound and it is a really big deal. Like, it is critical to our survival to have safety and security when it comes to financial stuff. And so there's so much going on with money because money is so flexible and it's a huge source of like power and freedom. And obviously people like to control that. So do you have any like high level comments on women and money before we dive into
Yeah, I think I would
the
just
nitty
say
gritty?
it's a more complex topic than I think people think about. We have our day to day, we deal with money. We see courses and people all the time telling us this is how you're going to make money and let me help you make money. And we often hear money makes the world go round. And in my own experience, I felt like I learned firsthand that money controls everything. When I worked in research, I honestly saw how money controlled a lot of the results that came from that research. I saw it firsthand. I worked on the studies. And so that was one of my big awakenings. And, this comes from big structural systems and as like all the way from the top, right? All the way from structural systems, all the way down to our own life. So we interact with money and value all the time. And I think that's why it's so important to have this conversation. And it's probably not going to go in all the directions people might think it's going to go. So I'm just warning everyone, strap in. This is a big one. And I'm excited to get started.
I love it. All right, so let's talk about those big structural pieces. The first thing that came out of my mouth when I said feminine money wounds was women couldn't even own
Mm-hmm.
money until like 50 years ago, right? And as a lawyer, Julie, you were like, oh, I have so many things
Yes,
to say about
ma'am. Better
this.
believe it.
So tell us, tell us about how the 19th Amendment and bank accounts and land and divorces are all
Yeah. So
related and
there's
what is
something in
this
the law
called?
called coverature, and that's a legal term that basically bound women as an extension. Wives are an extension of their husbands. And so what that meant in the US and also in the UK and UK like legal systems, and actually in most of the world, was that like Jaye Anne said, women could not own property, women could not own goods, they couldn't have bank accounts in their names. Now, if you were a single woman, sometimes you could. Sometimes, but that was pretty rare and an exception. And this really affected wills, trusts, people's estates, their ability to pass property on because everything was linked as a unit. Now, I'm not saying that I don't want people to take this the wrong way, that, marriage is inherently a bad thing and like women are chained down or anything like that by having a relationship. Obviously, both Jaye Anne and I are married, but at the time, if you were married, you did not have legal rights when it came to property. And this also came down to divorce. So, this is why we had things like alimony, which is pretty rare now. But if people don't know, alimony is basically money from the male counterpart, right? The husband in the relationship to the wife after they split, because, this comes from feeling like women cannot have money, they cannot make money. It's different than child support. That's a whole different thing. Alimony is simply money because we were married to each other, because I owe you that much. And there are some cases in the United States where there still is alimony, but most of the time now it's not, because there's more of a view of equal partnership and women now finally have the ability to actually own property. So coverature has extended since way before the 1500s, 1600s, before the US even became a country. Coverature affected strongly states' rights. Although coverature technically ended with the 19th Amendment in 1919, it's still part of some state laws. Like, it hasn't been outlawed in all state laws, even though, of course it's moot now, like courts won't use it or take it up. But there were places that women couldn't own money, like Jaye Anne said, really until like the 1970s, the 1980s. And this was a real thing that happened. I've read these cases. And so, as far as voting rights, and for people who don't know, the 19th Amendment is the one that gave women voting rights. Women could not vote, right? They're still an extension of their husband. And that changed women's ability to vote. And also, it made women more a part of the 14th Amendment, which is about due process and your rights as a human being, for you to be able to have equal rights to other people. So, um, if you want to think about it this way, the Emancipation Proclamation was in the 1800s, right? And the equal rights of colored people came into being all before, of course, we have the movement in the 60s later, but all before women even got the right to vote. Black men and previous people who were slaves got the chance to vote before women got the chance to vote, before women were even able to own property. Now, that's not to say that obviously that is not to say that it wasn't incredibly difficult for minorities or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just putting into context the idea that women have been part of men and not been able to own property for a very, 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 very long time. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and so like the ancestral piece to that, or the like learning piece to that, is my parents or my grandparents, my maternal grandmother or whatever, was not allowed to own property in her own right. So, how can she pass down any information or knowledge or teachings on how to appropriately manage a property, how to appropriately own money or manage money? So, it's getting better because we have all this internet information. And that's why a lot of people worked as the internet came to being, went away from the referral based concept of like, I got to learn stuff from my parents or like people we know, into like total strangers know more than my family does. And so it's great and it's bad, right? Because it's great that we've been able to get this information. But there's still like a piece of it that is, I'm not supposed to know this, or like my family doesn't know this. And these are stories that my family has. So we'll get into all of that as well. But just being aware that, like, within living memory, not many generations ago, it was not even possible. And I think even it wasn't until
Mm-hmm.
1988 that women could
Yeah,
own
there was a lot of
businesses, which is insane.
back and forth around that. That's not to say that like some clever women were able to get around this, and particularly inheritances is where women would be able to get land and pick up things like that. But that's why, heiresses, I think there's a wound there too in this idea I didn't earn it, right? Like I can't get money by earning it or by doing something from it, right? Or like we have a lot of bad feelings. Like I think there are a lot of people who really don't like Paris Hilton because she's an heiress and she makes money, right? That way, we have a lot of feelings about, well, you didn't earn it. And it's this really big dichotomy of, well, before money had to be passed down or inherited. And also, this hurt families in many ways because some women would choose to stay single because that way they could own some things, that they could have money. And so that also ended up hurting families and causing wounds. But yeah, on one side, we've got this like, oh, you didn't earn the money and you were an heiress and you're a daddy's girl. And how did you, get all of that? And on the other side, we have all these wounds of, wow, I don't know how to handle money. And my grandmother couldn't own things, and now I have that passed down to me and I don't know how to deal with it. And I have these wounds from that also.
Beautiful. So great. One other piece of information, because it's not just about money. Money is a vehicle, but the things that we're really looking for is power,
Mm-hmm.
it's autonomy, and it's
Mm-hmm.
freedom,
Big time.
and it's safety. So when it comes to autonomy and safety, sometimes when we don't have money, we end up having to mortgage those things as a way to get those things. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm talking about in health. right? And so we had a brief conversation. Can you just summarize a little bit about the history of women's health and how it relates to
Yeah, a lot
women's
of
power,
people
autonomy, and
don't know
freedom?
this, but forced sterilization is still legal in the US and has been legal. But particularly, forced sterilization was legal for women first. And, of course, women who are in prison or women who are seen to have too many children or women who don't have enough money. And I know that sounds hard to believe now. I think people are like, there's no way that's true. But look back, I promise you, you can look it up yourself right now. And, this was very much during the eugenics movement. A lot of people don't realize that the eugenics movement really did have a place in the US as well. And starting in the late 1800s, it wasn't just in Germany, it wasn't just far off. We also had this eugenics movement. And part of that was we have too many women bearing children, and these women are too poor and they're too much of a cost on our society. And so the solution to that in many states, now a lot of the times this was state by state, was we're going to sterilize women. So we'll sterilize women who are in prison. We'll sterilize women who are, don't have enough money, or the people that we feel like have too many children. The other thing that would happen was that they would send women to charity hospitals, and these charity hospitals would not charge the women any money to get a procedure done. So women would come in and they'd have a cyst, right? Maybe they had PCOS or something. They would have a cyst, and instead of removing the cyst against the women's will without their consent, they would remove their entire uterus, right? They would give them a hysterectomy. And they did this to a lot of women who were sick, and the women would have no recourse. And the reason why is because they are not paying the hospital, because they paid no money, they couldn't actually sue the hospital. Now, that doesn't always stand today. Today, we have some laws to protect this from happening. But at the time, and it's always been throughout history, of course, this is what I deal with because I'm a medical malpractice attorney for people who don't know. So this is like deep in my stuff. I do constitutional law and I do medical malpractice. And what happens and what has always been the case is, well, okay, I'm just going to tell you the real deal. This is really what happened. What really happened was
Go for it.
in the 1700s and even before that, women took care of women during birth. Okay, we've got to start with birth because that's the way it really happened. But then what happened was the rise of surgery. And so in the early 80s, so women actually were quite good at taking care of each other. They wrapped each other in clean linens, and they had midwife traditions, and they helped each other a lot. But then what happened was the rise of the medical profession, and particularly surgeons and doctors taking over the places where women were, the midwives' places. And now instead of having a midwife deliver your child, you're having a surgeon deliver your child, right? This is still during the process of figuring out germs. Like, this is all during that process. And so what happened was doctors created guilds, and they created these guilds. And part of them creating these guilds was this idea: we're going to save women from childbirth, and we're going to save women from their own selves, basically. And a lot of the tactics that we still see today in medicine is where this showed up. So they had lots of tactics. This still happens where the doctor tells the husband to leave the room, and he talks to the husband privately, and he says, you got to tell your wife to do what I say, right? And it became this big, there was this big rise of doctors and this push away of homeopathy. They really tried to push that away. They tried to push women-centric care and medicinal care and traditional care. And really the rise of the doctor became the god. Really, like, doctors became gods. And then laws started to be changed to protect doctors instead of protecting patients. And this affected women particularly because women ended up, with the medical system more because they gave birth. And then that's when we start to see the rise of births with medical professionals rather than at home, and all those kinds of things. And so we kind of get, this huge structure where doctors win. Like, that's the law, right? Like, doctors end up winning. They win. And so women particularly feel like their bodily autonomy is taken away, and that they have no recourse for what's happening to them, and that they can't do anything about doctors going in and force sterilizing them. And the reason I think we're talking about this truly is because, like, our creative power as women is so sacred, right? It's our generation. It's part of what brings us value and how we give value and how we perceive our value. And so attacking our ability to create, attacking our abilities to have autonomy over our bodies and our births and how we want to birth and all those kinds of things is kind of starting from the beginning. And really telling us, okay, I've got to get safety somehow because I don't have safety in these situations. I don't have knowledge of money and how to make money, and that hasn't been passed down to me. So I've got to figure out how to be safe in another way. And so a lot of women, that's where we get a lot of this, like, I've got to play small, or I've got to do what the doctor tells me. I've got to do what people tell me to. And to get money, I have to be good. I have to be a good person. And I have to get it from, I can't create. So I just touch on that history because I think very few people know that we always talk about, like, well, babies were dying so much in the 800s, but they weren't in the 1700s. Believe it or not, babies were not dying as much. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, the whole surgeon thing, I'm right here with you on this. The whole surgeon thing is baffling to me because the reason they had childbed fever was because they would go from an autopsy to a birth, and that would kill the woman because they demonized hand washing, and
Mm-hmm.
midwives were big on hand washing. So of course
Mm-hmm.
it was like evil to wash hands. And yeah. And what a lot of people don't know, and I'm going to get off this
Yeah.
soapbox because this could be a whole episode on its own, and probably will be. But one of the things people assume the medical profession has always been the medical profession
Mm-mm.
for hundreds of years, and that's not true at all. It really only kind of surged in the late 1800s, and at the same time as a lot of other medical type professions were surging, and it found its footing because of stuff that happened during the Industrial Revolution. So it had nothing to do with, like, oh, it's always been doctors and they've always been big proponents of hand washing and sterilization techniques and cleanliness. Like, no, they
Mm-hmm.
were
For a long
literally like
time.
way against it. It was like
Mm-hmm.
considered heresy to wash your hands in the medical profession. So, but what really happened is sort of like how countries form, is like they just kind of had a champion and they all sort of formed together, and the MD medical doctors became a thing, and then they
Mm-hmm.
demonized everything else. So that's why we have medicine and complementary medicine. So anyways, that's some, like, my little soapbox on
Well,
that.
and that
But
had to do with money, right? That has to do with money.
as it relates,
Right. Right. Because
and it had to do with
yes,
that's
well,
true. Like, it
because
was literally a
who
money
funded it,
grab.
right? I know this is gonna sound crazy, but this is true. You can literally look at that, like, anyone can look this up. But Rockefeller was the
Yeah.
biggest proponent of this type of
Mm-hmm.
medical system, right? He used to have a homeopath and
Yeah.
everything. Anyway, you can look deep into his history and all of those kinds of things. But this is like legit history. Anyone can look this up. He funded because they were using petrol, right? So he's a gas tycoon. They started using petrol to create pharmaceuticals and things like that. They got him on board and he gave the biggest push, right? It was about money. And we as women ended up on that receiving end. Of course, men too. I don't want to say men don't end up on the receiving end, but because women had had their own medical traditions for thousands of years and had been midwives and caring for each other for thousands of years, that being taken away really affected women feeling like they were safe enough to receive and that they could trust. And it really affected and created this big money wound and this big wound around my safe, safe and having autonomy.
Yes. Yes. And this is also really relevant because I think a lot of the careers and businesses women are
Mm-hmm.
drawn to are in the healing arts. And to feel like I can't or shouldn't make a living doing this kind of work, it's such a common thing that I work with clients every day. And they're like, on one hand, I see the value, even me some days, like, on one hand, I see the value and the power that this is creating and this, like, amazing shifts that people are having. On the other hand, I feel like I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't charge people
Mm-hmm.
for it because that's bad. And why is that, right? Like, that's why we have to be aware of history and what happened to create the societal underpinning of, like, these stories of,
Mm-hmm.
that's why we have
Mm-hmm.
to rewrite these stories. Totally. Anyways, I love this. Thank you so much, Julie, for all of that beautiful, like, picture that you painted with the legal side of things and why
Mm-hmm.
that's the context that we're living in. That's just the societal context. But let's talk about money in itself. Do you think that money is
Oh, we had a
masculine or
little chat
feminine, and
about
why?
this before because Jaye Anne and I had different answers to this when we started talking about it. But
Did it?
I believe money itself is feminine, 100%. Money is feminine. The things that we do to get money are masculine, but money itself is definitely feminine.
Yep. Yep. And I had a different answer. My answer was it's both. But in talking to Julie, it made a lot of sense. And I've never been able to put my finger on why it feels like both, but it's just the fact that money itself, resources in general, they're feminine. Everything we see in front of us, right? This was episode 1. Everything we see in front of us is
Mm-hmm.
part of the feminine, is part of the earth. And but the action steps to acquire, yes, absolutely masculine. Yeah. So why do you think that women struggle even when they're deeply in their masculine, achieve, that they struggle to actually create that money
Yeah, I think there are
or
tons of
sustain it?
reasons for this, some of which we touched on, but a lot of it comes down to I think a lot of it comes down to wounds like I'm not good enough, right? I think that's a huge, huge wound. I'm not good enough. I'm not deserving enough. And when women are in their masculine, I think they cannot receive, right? They're not opening themselves up to receive that money. And because they're blocking it, they've closed. When you become so masculine as a woman, the first thing you do is close off that flow, that reception flow to yourself. And this is part of the reason women can't even receive compliments, right? Like they can't have somebody tell them good job. They can't, let people give them any kind of free gift or anything like that, because the first thing we do is really close that space of us that is the receptor, because we're rejecting ourselves and we're rejecting the feminine. And so even though we do and we push, push, push so hard in our masculine, we will not receive that feminine because we don't actually want it, right? We've closed it off. We've, boarded it up, taped it up, and we kind of say to ourselves, like, I can't receive. I can only, give. I can only push. I can only do these things, like, because I'm not worthy of it, because that's not part of me. Or we've labeled it as because it's weak, reception is weak. Getting these things is weak. Whereas, like, when you're a man, that's your goal, right? You live in the hero's journey and everybody's telling you you deserve to have stuff. And I mean, I shouldn't say not everyone is. And again, I'm not saying this because I think men are bad at all. I think men are awesome, but they have their messages are often that they get is, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to work. I work and I get something back. I give and I get something back. They're used to that. And because they close off their feminine, are like, no, 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 I work to work to work to work. And like, I just have to put out because it's weak to receive. And I won't be in the boys' club, or I won't be seen or viewed as successful or accomplished if I receive. So I think that's a big part of the reason. What do you think, Jan?
Yeah, everything you said, absolutely, absolutely. Especially the compliments piece. If I can't receive a compliment, how will I ever believe that I can receive something as intangible and valuable as money? Start with compliments. Start with compliments instead of like doing that natural like, oh no, ha 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 thing. Just start with receiving it and accepting the compliment. Oh, it's so hard at first. Oh my gosh, it's so hard. But that is the same feeling you're going to have with money. Same feeling. I think that also what you were saying with like how men were trained versus how, and this is like just societal underpinnings, right? This is just how people react to men and their behaviors, how people react to women and their behaviors. It has nothing to do with like everyone went to man school and got the man download. No, it's just like this is how we behave differently to the different genders. But women are a little bit primed biologically to think more long term and see more long term. And so we block for the short term and go later on, later on, later on. And so I think that we overuse that in tandem with the hyper masculine achievement because we go, okay, well, I can wait. I can wait. I can wait. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes now
Mm-hmm.
is okay too.
Well, we're not
Sometimes now
used
is
to the
okay.
now. I think we get, it seems too scary, too big. And I think this also plays into being seen, right? And that safety piece, that if I get everything I want now, and this may not be consciously, this is very subconscious. And I think there are a lot of different trains of thought on this for women, right? There are a lot of different underpinnings. For some women, it's like, if it's not hard, it's not worth it, right? Because we've been told our whole lives everything has to be hard to be good. You have to do the hard thing, it has to be hard. So that's a way we push away money and things like that. Another part of it is, if I have this money, someone's going to want to take it from me, or I'll have to share it with people. I'll have to give it to other people, and I don't want to give it to other people. I don't want to share it. And so I'm going to push it away, or just like it's not safe because, we have all these. I think I've said this before, but like every time in movies, who's getting robbed? Whose purse is getting robbed? Oh, it's a purse. It's a woman, right? Like women are the ones getting robbed. Women are the ones getting kidnapped and like held at gunpoint for the money. And like women are the ones who, whatever it is, it's usually women who in these movies, in this media and everything we see are the ones who end up getting harmed. We've already talked about the witch wound and about how women really were harmed for having money and have been. And so for some women, it's just like, it's not safe to have money because what if I get hurt in that process?
Yeah. Well, and that the movies are
Mm-hmm.
hugely based on the hero's journey. And so the hero needs someone to save. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a woman. It's not a normal story, it's just a playing out of the natural need to have the one who needs to be saved. But it's always like this example. So we have to start looking to different stories. I read this book called On Our Best Behavior. Gosh, I can't remember the author. She goes through all of the
Mm-hmm.
seven deadly sins and describes exactly how each of them were actually pretty pointed at women. And because they're not actually in the Bible anywhere, none of that is in the Bible. But one of the coolest things she wrote in this book was that men are trained for power and
Mm.
women are trained
Yeah,
for
very true.
virtue.
Very true.
So when we are starting to see like, oh, I'm allowed to have power, like really get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it, because it's virtuous to be humble. It's virtuous to be like, that is the goal. It's not, the goal is not to have power. So shifting into that ability to have power, because that's what we really want when we are after money, is like, I want to have autonomy. I want to have the power to say, this is what I want and I'm going to go get it. But if we're constantly trying to get rid of the power because we feel like, it's not a good woman and doesn't have the power, subconscious, again, all subconscious, then we kind of
Mm-hmm.
go and get rid of
Mm-hmm.
it, get rid of it, get rid of it.
Or she has to be in distress, like we talked
Mm-hmm.
about, right? She's the princess that the dragon is going to eat, and once she's saved, then her power is restored to her, right? Or she's the frozen queen, that has to be unfrozen in order to get that power. And so I think women are very, very afraid of having power. And we've talked about this in our Taylor Swift episode as well, but because, like, when exactly like you said, when people see you as powerful, then they start bad mouthing you, right? Like, then, like, oh my gosh, she's a biatch. Like, this woman who has this power is awful. She's terrible, or she's so nagging. She's so this, she's so that. And so I think you're totally right. It's this play on our view that it is virtuous not to have power. But even if just to deconstruct that a little bit, there's two thoughts here. One is, if you believe in Christ and Jesus, right? He was like the most powerful person, and you don't have to, and yet like humble and perfect. And so you can have power. He did all these miracles, he made all these things happen. You can have power and still be, a good person, humble, virtuous, all those kinds of things. But I think as women, we're very much trained, and sometimes because we don't have that feminine power pattern, we don't have the feminine, which goes to what we kind of talked about with David Butler, like when you don't have this archetype
Mm-hmm.
for women, which many women don't have, of a feminine goddess, or like a view of a powerful woman, it's really hard to see like, oh, having power doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It just, I can have power and still be good. And so we fall into these wounds, and we fall into this, like, I'm not deserving piece.
Yes, so beautifully said. So let's talk about, where does money come from and how do we get it from an energetic standpoint, and then definitely we're going to talk about relationships and money
You
and
can
how does
start,
that
Jan.
work. Yeah, so money is an exchange for value. That's it. Like, somebody wants something and then they use money to get it. And the way you get money is that you create something of value, right? but it always comes from people, right? So it's never just like a bag of money shows up by itself. Someone had to put it there. Or like money doesn't grow on trees, but you can have the creative function to go, oh, this thing grows on trees and other people will want it. So let me give it to them in exchange for money. And so that's like the biggest thing that I think people forget is the simplicity of what it's for and how it works. That's it. But there is a powerful element of relationship in that because it has to come from a person. It has to. So you have to be right with relationships and okay with the idea of relationships and very strong with boundaries. When you have good boundaries, you actually make more money because you're not making people feel uncomfortable with your lack of boundaries. I think that's
No,
what would
I
happen.
I
Go ahead,
completely
your turn.
agree. I think the relationship is super important. And I do just want to throw in as a caveat because I don't think we've said this yet, but money is not evil. We haven't said that.
Right.
But there is like this element that's ingrained in all of us. I think this like goes with the power thing we were talking about, that money is evil. And yes, like powerful people have used money to do terrible things. Like that has happened, and people have done terrible things to have money. So, yes, that does happen, but it doesn't mean that money itself is actually evil. And I think that's a big hang up that women have. Not just women, I think men and women, culture, and especially when you're talking about like virtue or like purity culture or like, having to be good. A lot of times there's this misconception that money is evil, right? Like money is the root of all evil. How many times have we heard that? Like money is the root of all evil. It's not. And I think that's why it's important that Jaye Anne explained money is literally just an exchange of value. That's it. I gave you this as a show of value to you, which is why it means so many things, but it doesn't have to actually be evil. It's also money that has done so many good things for people and helped people, saved people, and made our world work in many beautiful ways. And so, of course, like it would be cool if we had a society where we didn't need money, where we exchanged and where we all got our own stuff. But right now, we have to deal with this value piece. We have a value piece, and that's what we're dealing with. And that's where like relationships come in, because it's like, oh, you gave me this much money. I must be that valuable. That's how valuable I am to you, right? Other people have to give it to you. And so it becomes this insignia of, oh, this is how valuable I am. What do we say about people who have money? What's their net worth? What's your net worth? How much are you worth? And we say that about a person, not just a business. So I think, and Jaye Anne and I talked about this beforehand, but Lacey Phillips always says this, and I think it's very true. If you have money problems, you really have relationship problems. You have relationship problems, then you've got money problems.
Yep. There's always a connection between the two. Absolutely. And every time you dig deeper, or in my experience, every time I've dug deeper into a relationship that I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I can say that or do that. And then I go and do it. And then the money piece shifts dramatically. It makes a big difference. It makes a big difference. And I want to go back just for a second. I love that you said that brought this up about money not being evil. And the thing that you said about money being feminine is like, how interesting that we
Mm-hmm.
demonize, once again, the feminine. And we do this in such a big way where, like, oh, this is a bad thing, but you need it, right? So it's just like the feminine. It's a bad thing, but you need it to survive. And so, how can you need something that's bad to survive unless we're
Mm-hmm.
bad people? And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that's true. Or existence is bad. Like
No.
that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we were kind of talking about how, just as we're relating this to women, right? We talked a little bit before the show about prostitution and this idea that, like, oh, it's the world's oldest
Mm-hmm.
profession. And this idea that, just comparing this to money being feminine, but just this idea that, it's just so interesting because men desperately want what women have to give, right? Like the masculine desperately wants the touch of the goddess. It wants the feminine, right? And that pleasure and, sex, really. Like men want that and they want that companionship, and that's the way that they feel love in so many ways. And women are often, but that piece, that sexuality piece is often viewed as evil, right? And I am not, this is not me saying that like prostitution is good in any way. Like, obviously, there are terrible sex crimes that happen and all kinds of things, especially with children, and all of that is not good. But what I'm saying is that just like money, sex itself is not inherently evil. And that, having pleasure and this ability that women have to like unlock the gates of pleasure and to have that peace that men, they can pretend to get on their own, but it's so false for them, right? They need that peace. The masculine needs the feminine needs the masculine. Sorry, we both need each other. That's just the way that life rolls. And so in the same way that like sex itself has been demonized instead of seen as sacred and beautiful, money is also, this feminine thing has been demonized as well.
Hey friends, it's Jaye Anne here. If you have been feeling really stressed out about the world lately, you are not alone. There's been enough crazy and fear flying around the internet that even I've been knocked off my rocker sometimes. But it's times like these that I'm really grateful for the tools I have to regulate my nervous system. I developed these tools for myself when I was going through the thick of it. My babies were young and I had a ton of repressed anger. And these tools help me through other stressful times, including negotiating my own divorce, having difficult money conversations, and of course, the whole COVID experience. And I've put all these tools in a method I call the authentic self-care method. This is different than other self-care programs because it is a framework for you to find your special sauce when it comes to self-care. And let me tell you a secret. Step one is not take a bath, get a haircut, or go to the gym. Step one is regulate your nervous system. And that's exactly what we do inside the 3-in-1 membership. This powerful program includes focused journals and meditations you can do in just a few minutes, like the fight or flight session, the hippocampus session, which rewrites your ability to see new possibilities, and the vagus nerve session, which helps you regulate your whole body in a crisis. Using these tools, members have reported feeling more empowered, more expansive, and many experience relief from actual physical pain, all for less than $2 a day. So join the 3-in-1 membership now so you can learn these tools today. The world is not going to become less crazy. The only thing you can control is how you respond to it. The 3-in-1 membership will help you do that, so click the link in the show notes to enroll today. Along those lines, when we create a value, right? So Julie was saying earlier how our creative force, our creative process is powerfully important to our financial changes. And when we create something and then we go and try to sell it, there's an emotional reaction that happens for a lot of women. And that is, I should just give this away. It's so important and people need it so much that it's selfish of me to charge money for it. And it's so important and it's so vital because we're creating things that are vital to life. And so it feels weird for a lot of women to just charge money for it. And I think a lot of women compare that to prostitution. Like, oh, like I'm selling my body in a way. And because it does feel a lot of personal when we create something, it feels so personal to us, so personal. And it's really, really tough to get out of that mindset because it's like, first of all, am I worthy comes up. Is this safe comes up. Should I have power comes up. And all these things sort of like jam the signal and prevent us from actually taking the necessary masculine action of creating the money for it and selling it. And am I going to be annoying, or am I going to cross other, unspoken female boundaries that are present? So what are your thoughts on this? Like creating something of value and then going and selling it. And what are your
Yeah, I
thoughts?
think that, it's exactly like you said. We are always told, like, oh, you shouldn't sell those things like it's so vital or like it's so important or you should just give it away, right? Like we should give away these wonderful things. And I think, women, I think it's also that piece is also like it's safer. It's safer to do that. Like it's safer if I'm just giving it away.
Mhm.
And, it keeps people from being mad at me. This is like a boundaries issue. It keeps people from trying to hurt me or take what I have if I just give everything away. But, the reality is we can't just give it away because it is so valuable. We can't. Even life saving procedures, right? Like if we go back to the medical field in the hospital, like even life saving procedures cost money because they're so valuable. And it's not that you are trying to hurt anybody or that you're taking away from anybody when you are, charging value. It's that it becomes an equal exchange, right? And this is what we're after. We want the equal exchange because when someone just gives and gives and gives, that's not a true relationship. That's not balanced. The relationship will become imbalanced at some point. I think the only exception to this sometimes is motherhood, but even in motherhood, I would say you receive from your children, right? You receive that unconditional love that only kids can give in a way that only kids can give. I mean, teens, that's another story, but at least little kids, right? When they get older, they can do more for themselves. They give back that deep, deep unconditional love. And so we as women, we want to apply that motherhood thing to everything. We're like, oh, just like a mom, like I should just give everything away like I do to my kids, but they're not your kids. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That is the only time when boundaries are a little bit less solidified, are a little bit less clear, right? Um, so let's go into the idea of ancestral stories and patterns. Um, Yeah, so let's go into the idea of ancestral stories and patterns. We were touching on this earlier with the context or the legal side of things, but let's go deeper into that concept. So, number one, a lot of people, just like we have talked about with the witch wound, but even in more recent times, a lot of people have money stories in their family that are continuing to replay themselves out. For example, say you had someone steal all your money, or your family was under threat in the way past, right? Your family was under some kind of threat, but so there's just like this fear. There's this fear that someone's coming to get you. There's this fear that something is going to come after you. And what they really want is your money, and they want your safety, and they want you to feel afraid, right? So we're going to look at that kind of ancestral story and pattern where what if in my family's history, I have stories where it is not safe to have money, or I have stories where, we've had ransoms or kidnappings because of money. What if even in your past history, in your family's history, where you just didn't have any money, and that was just like the stories were told of the value of not having money. That's a huge story that's passed on for a lot of people. It's like, oh, it's good to not have money. We're better than them because they have money and we don't, and that's better because, again, the money is the root of all evil, right? So that is how we placate this grinding feeling within us of like not having enough, to say like, oh no, this is better, this is God's way, this is the righteous path, is to not have money. So that's like how those stories continue, because there's a lot of like, it doesn't make sense for it to be this unfair in a lot of cases. Let's say you had the other side of that coin in your family where your ancestors had lots of money, and there were people who were discriminating against you because you had lots of money, and maybe you hid. I've heard a lot of stories of like, especially women whose families were like well off in the area, and they would hide. They didn't want people to come to their house because their friends didn't have as much money, and they would like not be friends anymore because they had money. and they had resources and they got what they wanted, and they had the big Christmases or whatever it is. So this fear of like differences between money, that can be another story. Even in recent memory, in current memory, that could be a wound. So these are some stories and patterns that might be in families. They're really common to have these kind of things, and they play into how our childhood relationship with money goes. They play into, like, if your family couldn't talk about money at the dinner table or didn't talk about it, like it was a big taboo subject, how does that bode for you as an adult to talk about money with yourself or with your own spouse, because you have to have those conversations. So those are some really common ways of having ancestral stories and patterns and wounding, of just like, sometimes it's not even like big wounds where before we were talking about like you were hunted down for your money, but it could be just wounds of neglect, wounds of lack of awareness, wounds of just like a missing piece that you just didn't know. And instead of going to feeling empowered to go learn about that missing piece, you go, well, here's how I can just sort of
Yeah, can
cap
I
it
say
off and say, well,
something
it's
about
bad to
that?
go learn about that missing piece
Which
because my
is,
family doesn't do that.
we're still scared to talk
What are
about
you?
our
Go
salaries,
for it.
right? Like, how much do you make? Don't talk about that. And I didn't realize, like, even amongst close friends, this happened a couple years ago. I had a friend over, and
Mhm.
I thought it was just totally casual because they were talking about their financial situation, and I was like, "Well, how much do you guys make?" Because he's looking for a new job. It's like, "How much do you want to make?" And they were so uncomfortable that I asked that question, and like my friend was like, "Julie, how could you ask that?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's not about you. It's nothing against you. I'm just asking to see, like, okay, well, if we want to help you get a new job, like, what are you looking for? How much do you need? What does your family need?" It's not but we still see it because it's so much about
Yeah.
value. We still see it as, you're asking me what my value is. What am I worth? Right? What am I worth? And I think that is the scary thing for people, is, what am I worth? And we talk about it that way so much, like, what are you charging for your sessions? Oh, you're worth more than that, right? Like, oh, you're worth more. Your work is worth more than that. And I don't, not that I'm saying that's inappropriate necessarily, but I
Yeah.
think we've got our value too tied up, our worth too tied up in these physical things, rather than cultivating inner worth and inner safety, and being able to say, I charge this much because it is worth this much. But even if I charge less, it's not about my worth. It's just about what I am willing to, do this for and give the time for. And so that's why this can be so
Yes.
touchy. But for women especially, I think that's great. You brought up the ancestral patterns so much, is because, like, we're still telling ourselves stories about how much we're worth in relationship to our money time.
I want to say something really controversial. And I don't know if I 100% believe it's the only thing, but the discrepancy in income between men and women is something that's talked about a lot. And I don't know that it has so much to do only with discrimination. I think it has a piece of that for sure. Believe me, I worked in a corporate setting where it was very sexist. Like, that was an unspoken tenet of the organization. But I still made more money than most of my counterparts because I would be okay with being uncomfortable with the other person being uncomfortable. So that is a big piece. When you can negotiate, you end up with a higher salary. And I think a lot of women are afraid to negotiate, and they will not negotiate because of this inner worth thing. So the more you work on your inner worth, the more you're going to be like, duh, like, I would not take that. I would not accept that amount of money
Mm-hmm.
for my services, because that's just not what that action is worth, right? Because my inner worth, my existence of worth is so high
Mm-hmm.
that, like, it makes no sense for me to be like, that's just not a fair trade. But other people, when you're in that state of like powerlessness and victimhood, and I'm not good enough and I just need anything to be safe, you're going to end up negotiating lower, even if the other party can afford much higher. That's that's the roundabout way of saying, like, once you increase your inner worth, you will actually increase your income because you just live it. It's really, really hard
Yeah, and I think
um,
I think
to
too,
not at
right?
that
And
point.
and of course, I think there's
Um,
lots of different kinds of
so,
models that for women who have companies. There's lots of different kinds of models. You don't like some people are like you have to charge thousands of dollars to be worthwhile or to be making a lot. No, you don't necessarily have to do that model. You can pick a different model that works for you. But I do think for me, when I started doing sessions, I would charge like $50 for a session, which like some people listening to that probably are like, that's so much money, for a session. But now my lowest session is $222, right? Like that's the
yeah,
lowest you can pay to work with me. And I've had people who don't know very much about astrology or what I do, tell me, right? Like, how can you get people to pay that much? Like, how can you do that? And like, how can you charge this much? And it's bringing the awareness, like, because my time is actually worth that much. Like, that's how much my time is worth. It's also a specialized skill that I've spent a lot of time. If I were to say, like, that's how much I charge for my lawyer services, they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right on par. That's even maybe like a little low, right? Yeah, it's a great deal for a lawyer. And like, yeah, I'm not just a lawyer, I'm an astrologer.
great deal.
And,
Yeah.
it took a while for me to get to the point where I was like comfortable charging more. And I was really scared. And there was a particular session that I charge a lot for. I charge $450 for this. But now I'm like, man, I should charge $500 for it because it just takes so much energy from me. It takes so much energy, it takes so much of my time. But I see lots of women who are stuck in, I can't charge for that, right? Like I can't charge for that because, no one would buy it because my time isn't worth that much. Or they feel that about themselves. Again, like with the school with me and Kaylee, we charge a very low price for the whole year because we used a different model and we wanted everyone to have access, but we still are, because it's community based, we can still get paid fairly in this way. So I'm not telling everyone you need to charge thousands of dollars for your stuff. I'm just saying, because I think that can get kind of out of hand too. But what I'm saying is there is a reflection of what your time is worth and thinking about what your time is worth and what you're willing to do, right? Because it says a lot about how you value yourself. And if you're scared about that, there may be some unblocking to do around, I'm worth this.
100%. And I personally like have played with this for myself. And my goal with my work is not to like give people one session every 6 months. I want people to like have consistent changes. So I keep my prices affordable so that way people can have more than one session in a 6 month time frame. Do I think that
Mhm.
my time is
Mhm.
worth more than what I'm charging? Yes. But I don't really care. It's just I could charge more, but I really want people to feel the difference and like have that consistency. And so that's why I charge less than most other people. So I love this conversation because it gets not only to the point of like, yeah, negotiate your time. Like if you're working for a company, negotiate your time. Like go for the biggest number, 100%. If you are running your own business, the thing to do is really to dig down into your self-worth and say like what is it that my goals are, what do I want people to achieve, what is it the
Mhm.
value that I'm bringing, and then also, and this is the scary thing, go look at what other people are charging for a similar
Mhm.
service.
Mhm.
And the reason it's scary is because that's an easy way to compare yourself and be like, oh, I'm not good enough. Right. And so then if you have that reaction, you go and do the work and clear out whatever it is that's preventing you from believing that you are on par with this other person that you're looking at. But you've got to look at what
Mhm.
else is out there, because then you know whether you're on par. Like Julie said, like for a lawyer, what do they charge? $300 to $500 for one session. Um, for an astrologer, like if you don't even know what
Mhm.
astrologers are charging and you're gonna hang your shingle as an astrologer, you
Mhm.
you want to be on par. You don't want to be undercharging because then it'll look weird. So all that to say, like charging your worth,
Mhm.
let's rewrite that to charging what other people are going to value your work as,
Yeah, totally. And I
and
think,
charging
Jan,
the way
like
that your
to your
goals are
point,
set
right, of
out and
charging
who you want to
less,
help and how you
it's
want to help them.
about letting more people in, right? Wanting to have more sessions and wanting to have lots and lots of people, which is similar to what Kaylee and I are doing with the
Yeah.
school, right? We're charging much, much less because we want more people to come into the community, and that's the model that we're making. And if that's what you value, like you and Allie, like this, there's a lot of value. But for me, I don't want to do 5 sessions in a day. Like I'm like I can't do it, I my energy just doesn't span for that. I want to do like 2 sessions, 1 to 2 sessions a day, and I want to call it quits, right? Not cuz I don't love it, but you just have to know yourself, and that's another way I'm valuing my time, and you're valuing your time and what you're doing, and just asking yourself these questions. And if we're talking about this and it's triggering something in you, there's something to look at there for sure.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, and that's all the goal of this
Mhm.
is. When we're talking about money wounds, then it's like, okay, I'm triggered. Time to recognize I'm triggered, and let me go and clear that. Let me go and dig deeper and see what is driving that. Why is that
Yep,
happening? Because
100%.
otherwise, you're just going to feel like a victim all the time. And I don't want that for you. All right.
Ooh, we talked about this a little
What
bit.
is the relationship
Um,
between sex
we
and
talked about this
money?
a little bit. The relationship between sex and money, right? It's all about you're
Mm-hmm.
giving something incredibly valuable. And I personally think when you have sex with someone, right, you're giving them a piece of yourself, your energy, right? You're entangling your energy with their energy. You are, regardless, sex is a place where both sexes, both genders are giving something, right? Like it's supposed to be. So hopefully in the right context, right, it's both give and receive, both. I think that is the same. It's an exchange in the same way that like money is an exchange, and it is about value and about, if you've got sex issues, then there is some worth issues. Like for me, I mean, everyone's been on this journey with me. Maybe they haven't, but we've been on the journey, right, with me about dealing with sexiness, being scared to be sexy. And when I dig down into my own issues about intimacy and sex, it's always going to be the same thing, right? For me, it's the way I feel about my body, and that my body is not good enough, right? It's not good enough and it's not doing enough. But I have found, right? Like, and for most people, it's going to be the same thing as we talked about with the root with money. It's going to be about, I'm not good enough. And so, like, the way that you value yourself in your intimate relationships, especially in your most intimate relationships, and you're giving someone so much of yourself, you really got to look at your self-worth and how that unlocks money for you. And I have found, because I've been doing my challenge for myself, my 60-day challenge, looking at myself naked in the mirror and telling myself I love myself. I have like made more money this month than I have made all like last year, like the last like 5 months. I made more money last month. Literally when I started doing this, right? And addressing these issues, that's when the money started to flow in. And I just think that there's such a direct relationship. Do you have thoughts about that, Jaye Anne?
I love this. I love this relationship between body image and intimacy and money. It's so true. I think
Mhm.
there's something too about not only receiving, but being received. And that's another vulnerable space. And it's
Mhm.
like, it's not giving, but it's being welcomed.
Mhm.
It's like I'm offering something, and then the
Yeah.
person is
Yeah.
is receiving it.
Yeah.
And that is primal. That is primal.
Should we, and maybe this is
Wonderful.
dangerous. We can
So,
cut this part if it's too
what was the
dangerous,
last thing I was
Jan.
going to say?
Should we talk about the possibility of intimacy as a means to receive money, not prostitution? That is not what I'm saying.
Are you
No,
talking
no.
about
I'm
being
talking
married
about
as a form
intentional
of income?
intimacy, like using intentions
Or are
and
you talking about
intimacy to
magic?
help you receive. You want me to go first?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. What are
Okay.
your
So
thoughts on
to
that?
clarify for everyone who thinks I'm talking about crazy
Go
things
ahead.
over there, what I'm talking about is the fact that there are many things that we do, right? That we might put our intentions into, goals into. We do something with a goal in mind, we do something with an intention in mind. But oftentimes when it comes to sexual encounters, we don't do it with a goal in mind, right? We're too worried about all the other things, or we don't utilize its full potential. And like finding that if you go into having an intention, like having sex and having an intention in that sexual encounter, it can help clear stuff out for you and also help you to receive in the physical realm as well. And so that's what I'm talking about is, and people get really scared about this
Yes.
because there are lots of people who call this names like sex magic or doing something like that. But really, just what it is. And I think like sex is magical in and of itself, right? It can be. It definitely can be in the right context, obviously, like with the right person. But the whole idea of this is just alchemization, right? Alchemizing yourself, alchemizing your energy. When you go into having an intimate encounter with an intention in mind, right? That can really, in my experience, it ups the experience. Like it intensifies the experience and it makes it more, right? Because just like doing anything else, like for example, so for people who are freaking out right now, like think about putting an intention into your family dinner, right? Like you are sit down with a specific goal in mind at your family dinner, and the goal is for more close connection and help, right? To help one another, to love one another. Like that can be your intention for the family dinner. Or you have a party with an intention to make somebody feel loved, right? Can be the same idea that we can love someone, and when we're giving that intimate part of ourselves to somebody, we can have an intention, and that intention can be letting go of fear. That intention can be feeling, that deep intimacy, feeling wholeness. That can be to, release some bad feelings you've been having, right? It can be that. And you can bring intentions that together through your intimacy, you are creating something in the physical world, like maybe bringing more abundance into your life. And you use that powerful alchemization to help you both get on that same page and bring that goal to life. Is there anything you want to add?
I love this. Yes, I actually did this. I was playing with this a couple years ago when I was selling car insurance, and we were incentivized by the number of cars somebody had, right? So there was somebody who's like 8 cars, and I was like, I want that policy. And so I was trying to get this. So I did a intentional situation like that around that specifically getting that come to fruition. And I don't know if I did it wrong. It was like, I think I was being too specific about a person, not like any person with 8 cars. And
Oh no.
so then that
Oh.
person sent
Oh.
me a
Okay.
picture
Okay.
of himself, and the whole office thought, not like awkward, but like just his face. Just he was supposed to send me his registration, and it was like he flipped the camera around and sent me his face and was like, here you go. And I was like, nope, I did that wrong. I totally did that. It was the very next day too. So this stuff works. It's just, you can't be, it's just like with any manifestation work, you can't be hyper specific about a person or you're not going to get really what you want. You have to be hyper specific about
That's
the
right.
experience you want to have.
Not a
And what I
picture
really
of
wanted
someone who
was
had 8 cars.
8 cars,
Oh, that's good.
not a picture.
Yeah, like it
I did not write his
I have
policy.
had
I
experiences
stopped
with
talking to
this
that guy,
where
please.
I had an intention to open another income portal to bring our family more abundance after my husband lost his job. And it literally was immediate. It literally like it popped up. It was like, "Can you do this for me?" And I was like, "Oh, I for sure can." There was this email, "Can you do this for me?" And I was like, "Oh, I can. Oh, I should sell that. Oh, I could do that." And it became and still is an income portal that I have today. And so, like, this could be its own conversation, and maybe someday it will. I think probably some people may be triggered or freaking out right now about the thought of this, but it's potent. It's alchemy when two people come together. That is alchemy. That is like that release of giving and receiving and pleasure is like so sacred and so beautiful and so intimate, and using that potentness to bring our intentions to life, I don't think is evil. It's, you can use it for any kind of intention. If you feel uncomfortable with the idea of bringing abundance into your life, like by doing this with your spouse or whoever, you then, maybe just the intention is to have a better relationship, or to allow yourself to have more pleasure, or to allow yourself to, open up, or to release things, like starting with those ideas, because this can really help you get to the root of. I just brought up the money piece of it because this is getting to that root, right? They're all interconnected. Sex, money, value, our relationships. And this is like a potent way to heal a lot of those divides that we have around money, value, and all of those things.
100%. I will say, like, I wrote a course years ago about healing the wounds that we might have around, what is it called? Institutionalized
Mm,
religion, right? And one of those wounds is that sex piece. And in diving into the energetics of that, it had a lot to do with control and power, and less to do with like the act being evil itself. It was just more about like, hey, let's keep
mm,
people from accessing their true power by demonizing the O, right?
mm.
And so in that course, I like went through a whole process where you rewrite the whole process of the O, and it's really powerful. It's that stuff is really, really powerful stuff. And so when you are giving yourself permission to access your own power, it only naturally flows that
Yeah,
you're going to
definitely.
access
And
external
like,
power as
we're
well,
not
in particular the form of
trying to
money.
throw shade on anybody's religion by saying that, but like there are wounds, right, that we've had in culture around this being evil, just like we've had with money being evil. And so, if you're listening to this and you're part of a religion, that's not to throw shade on that, but we do. There are just time, like we have had culture over time. This is something else that has been totally demonized, that it's evil, 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 evil. And it's actually something powerful, potent, and important and sacred, and something that we, like Jaye Anne said, as we heal it and we heal our relationship to it, we can also heal our financial selves as well.
Absolutely. So, what is one thing, because we talked about a lot of different wounds, what is one thing people can do today if they had a big aha today, or if they had a trigger?
Yeah,
What
I
is one
think
way that we
we've talked
can
about this
clear it,
before,
heal it,
but
or
I think
release it?
sitting with I think journaling is so, so, so important. So, like, I think the first thing is like journaling about how you feel, whether you're mad, sad, angry, scared, nervous, whatever it is, writing that down. I also love to use tapping on it, tapping out the emotion and letting yourself say all the emotions. Like, you can say, like, I feel panicky about this. I feel angry about this. I can't believe they talked about this. Oh my gosh, I feel angry. Like, you can tap and say those things out loud, and you should, because it helps you release all that stuff. Writing it down, if you don't feel comfortable saying out loud, can be great. And then after you've done that, sitting with the small, like, where is, trying to go back to the age that you learned this from, the child in you, the part of you that's scared. And if you don't see a kid, that's totally fine. Like, maybe you see a teenager, maybe you just see you in college, whatever it is, whatever is ignited in you, see this ignited part as separated from you, and comfort it and love it. So that's what I would say. What did you say, Jan?
Oh, all of those things. Journaling is top priority, I think. And I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people have resistance to journaling. So if you're one of those people, then that's the first thing to work on because journaling is so powerful. It pulls up our subconscious, and we can find such great things to come out of our subconscious because we let our body take over, and our body is our subconscious mind. So giving yourself permission to journal and giving yourself like clearing around journaling to begin with is like start there if you have a trouble with that. But sometimes I found like dancing, because there's this kinetic energy. For I've had people come back to me and say, "Oh, I
Mhm.
was dancing at this party and I just felt this huge shift within me." Like, yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's
Yeah,
totally
ecstatic dance.
a blockbuster.
And yeah, and it totally,
Breaks
like,
down those
awakens the
blocks.
child within too, right? Like, it
That might be a
awakens your
tongue.
silly childlike part, and that can
No.
totally help you just get rid of this stuff and let it go.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. And I hope everyone has a great week. And we'll see you all next week. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Please make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening and share with someone you know. See you next week.